All right. Another day. I was a little frazzled yesterday. Another day. Now. Another day. More voices. More knowledge. More promoting free speech and freedom. Not being afraid. Truth, honesty, kindness, helping people. Trusting instead of the opposite. Your neighbor. What's new here? Not too much. It barfed snow yesterday and all night. Got real cold the last couple days and barfed snow. And now it's pouring rain. So it's just a yucky mess out there. But that's okay because I got a lot of indoor stuff to do. What else? Funny, any of you live rural, have your own chickens? It's kind of funny the other day. You know, you got to let people learn on their own, right? With a lot of different items at times. You'll understand what I'm getting at. And there's a couple of ravens out there. I had a few ravens hanging around the yard out front and out by the chickens. And I did catch ravens trying to kill chickens in the past. And Sarah said, no, apparently if you feed the ravens, they'll stay and they'll protect your chickens. I'm like, huh? She throws out all the table scraps and cooking scraps to the chickens out in the chicken yard in their pen, which is fully enclosed, except for the roof. And feeds them. And every morning I'll see the ravens flying out of there with a mouthful of food. Whatever. But I'm like, no, they're not going to protect your chickens. They're going to eat them when they get a chance if they're hungry enough to, right? So anyways, I'm sitting here yesterday, and I hear all chicken hell break loose out there. I go looking out there. A big white rooster we named Lucky because we found him up a logging road. He's got himself ditched in some blackberry thorns. And then I see a commotion over by the chicken gate, and there's another chicken who had jumped up over the fence and was on this side. And the ravens got her pinned in the ground, pecking the shit out of her, pulling feathers out. I thought it was dead. And then I come walking over there, I go run into the house, grab the pellet gun, I'm going to dummy this prick. And then jumps up, and the chicken stands up, and she's alive. I think she's still alive this morning. So there you go. They're not protecting your chickens. And then, of course, the bleeding hearts are going to be sniveling and whining and crying, so I'm going to dummy a raven. Well, that's the way it goes. This is my home, my chickens, my food source. You come and annihilate it, I'm going to kill you. There you go. It's the law of nature. It's how we survive. Those are the rules. Now, who do we got? I dove into some older folders here because I had to. Sometimes we're going to read the odd one that's already been read. Oh well. It's going to happen. Because of my mishap with the old phone. Nothing I can do. I can't get out of it, and that's just the way it is. But I don't think I've read this one, but here we go. And if I have, trust me, wasting your energy to email me that I had previously is going to do absolutely nothing for the two of us. Nothing. Appreciate the time spent. And always remember, there is possibly 100,000 people here new since one of these may have been read in the past. Maybe. All right? Now, this is titled Sunshine Coast Encounter 1977. That means it's right in the backyard, right over here. Near side of the water from the island, British Columbia. Hi, Steve. The topic of the forest beings is a very sensitive subject. There are way too many troubled people out there stepping over each other looking for that golden ticket while trying to prove and disprove the forest being's existence. These people are the real predators and are the dangerous ones because they are without conscience, guided by greed and fed by those who sit in the seats of power in buildings made of metal, concrete, and two-way glass. I would say it's not too far-fetched to mention that many of these people are creating unnecessary hype and fear for both distraction and personal gain, and clearly this is very wrong. However, on the upside of this, it has created the truth seekers, the real scientists, the ones of fair mind and of strong moral value. We will prevail as we are many, and we all want the same thing, the truth to be known. The forest beings have already been found a long time ago, and that's been proven. I believe they have evolved somewhat over time because they needed to adapt beyond their native indigenous environment due to human interference. They will never be where we are, and I am sure they do not want to be where we are. They don't need us to survive. I would imagine they have a simple and uncomplicated way of life with simple rules. Their intellect and actions speak loudly, as they have already told us that they are not without boundaries. We are possibly the biggest hurdle they face. We are as unpredictable to them as they are to us, and we are far more dangerous to their existence than they are to ours. They've been watching us for longer than we know. They have seen what we are capable of and know how destructive we can be by constantly interrupting the natural balance and evolution of this planet. A mistake we humans have made for generations. There's a saying simply put, those who ignore history are condemned to repeat it. We have, and we will, period. Their government's involvement is a foolish venture, and not only for personal gain and power. The only way they could ever be of any service to these forest beings would be to openly admit their existence and educate the human populace on them. Designate educators guided by true knowledge and not script, to show the people their boundaries and how to avoid them, and teach the troubled people what not to do. Do we need to know more about them? Definitely a solid yes. To protect them, and by doing this, we protect ourselves. We need to observe from afar, learn what we see and adapt to their needs. Give them space to live and stay out of the way. I know they are out there because I've seen one. I did not find it. I am told it found me. I've been living with and holding on to the information I'm about to share for over 35 years. I've shared this with 7 people I felt I could trust, a very gifted therapist in 2012 that I'm forever indebted to, and 6 others within the past year, all with different responses and thoughts on the matter. I'll send these in a return reply email if requested, as they are an interesting read. May 1977. I was 15 years old, and we went to school and lived in North Vancouver, British Columbia. I spent my summer that year in the Sunshine Coast, 40 to 50 miles away up the coast during tourist season, where our family had a couple of small businesses in one of the small bays, midway between Sechelt and Earl's Cove. There wasn't a lot to do for kids in the small bay we lived on, so we would often head south to a more populated bay where the local kids would go and hang out. It was 5 p.m. on a typical warm May summer night, and my brother and I and a group of kids made the 10-minute crossing by boat to a couple of bays over. After a couple hours, I went back to the boat, only to find the boat was gone, and my only alternatives were to sit and wait around for the boat to appear again, or make my way back home on foot. I decided to make my own way home, as I was kind of pissed at my brother for leaving me there, and I needed to cool off. I'd done this trip many times on foot, so it really was not a big deal. In total, the trip was about 7.5 miles and would take me about 2 hours to get back to our bay. The trip home would take me 3.5 miles along the Sunshine Coast Highway to a turnoff onto a rural road where it would be another 4 miles to the bay where we lived. It was dusk, about 7 p.m., when I started walking north down the gravel shoulder on the left side of the highway. The Sunshine Coast Highway in this area has 2 lanes winding along the side of the mountains and was heavily forested. About 200 feet downhill to my left was a small, tidal inland muddy estuary that I could only catch a glimpse of every once in a while through the trees. To my right, it was uphill where a denser forest began 6 feet in from the gravel shoulder and small ditch at the side of the road. After covering about 2 miles, I was walking on a downhill grade towards a sharp left in the road. And then suddenly, time just stood still. I give credit to my therapist, who was able to extract much of my recall through hypnotherapy. And I give credit to my mother, who I know gave me the strength to write this. What I smelled. A light breeze was coming off the small estuary on my left, and I could smell the ocean as well as the smell of oyster and clam shells that had been sitting on the sand in the sun all day. I could also smell the cedar trees that line the highway and the smell of the dust off the gravel road I was walking on. There's also a strong, musty smell of wet moss and skunk cabbage. What I heard. Something was moving just inside the tree line, maybe a couple hundred feet behind me on my right. I could hear the sound of tree branches breaking and deadfall on the forest floor being snapped and cracked under the weight of something fairly big, possibly a bear. I stopped and looked to the right behind me, and I couldn't see anything. The movement I was hearing had stopped. I started to walk, and again I could hear something moving. Whatever it was moved with me and would stop when I stopped. I knew then that whatever it was, excuse me, could see me and was pacing my steps. I stopped to listen again, but this time the noises continued and started to change from branches to twigs breaking to smaller rocks falling and gravel being kicked onto the pavement. Then to nothing, no noise at all. What I saw. I stopped and made a full turn to look behind me, and about 100 feet behind me on the opposite side of the road, I could see a silhouette outlined against the asphalt. It was a dark figure standing almost perfectly still. It was covered in a long, dark fur or hair I could see moving in the breeze. It was possibly up to 8 feet or more in height, and there were no defined facial features that I could see, only a slight shine or lighter colored fur. I knew this was not a bear. It was definitely not a human, it was just too big. I could tell that its head was turned slightly to one side. It was looking directly at me. The head seemed as long as it was wide. The head seemed as long as it was wide and looked like it was sitting on shoulders about 5 feet across. His torso looked thick. The legs were about 12 inches or more wide in the thigh. It had very thick arms and ended just below its knees. I could see the shoulders slightly moving up and down. There was nothing vocal, not a breath. And what I felt, a very intense feeling came over me. All of a sudden I stood frozen. It felt like everything had just gone into slow motion. I felt instant heat and sweat forming on my head, face, and body. My head was pounding. I got a little foggy-headed, and at the same time, it was like I became totally in tune with every sense in my body. I felt like I was underwater. My ears were ringing, and I could feel my heartbeat thumping in my ears, nose, and chest. I could feel myself taking in air and hear it at the same time. Every muscle in my body was tightening. My arms and legs felt weak. My stomach felt twisted, and my throat felt tight, and I was unable to swallow. My skin was tingling with what felt like tiny electrical shocks, and I could feel every hair on me stand on end. I felt pressure behind my eyes, but my vision was clear. I could feel the ground under my feet. For a minute, I forgot where I was. Now, this is what I know. It seemed like a lifetime that I stood there frozen in fear, not moving a muscle and barely breathing. I don't think I was talking out loud, but remember saying, "Please don't hurt me." As I slowly became aware of my surroundings and what was happening, I remembered the sharp hairpin corner in the road that I had been heading towards about 50 feet behind me. I started slowly stepping backwards, glancing over my shoulder back and forth several times, trying not to take my eyes off of what I was looking at in front of me. I still had not moved from where it stood. It still had not moved from where it stood. I remember telling myself over and over, "You'll be okay, just move slow." I was almost to the corner and thought about running once I got around it out of sight. I was not sure if this is the right thing to do, as growing up around bears, I was taught this was not what you do. I finally reached the corner and slowly started turning away. I think I took about 3 or 4 steps into the corner before looking back to where it was standing, and it was still there, and had moved off of the road onto the shoulder closer to the tree line. It was either crouched down or sitting, not moving. I turned the corner and started to run. I probably covered close to a half a mile before I slowed and stopped, and I could now see the glow of the light at the turnoff to the bay ahead of me. I just stood there on the side of the road, bent in halfway with my hands resting on my knees, listening. As much as I didn't want to, I turned to look back behind me. I could not see or hear anything. As quickly and suddenly as all the madness had started, it has stopped. I felt a total calmness come over me, almost a sedated feeling. I started walking towards the turnoff, and I remember looking up at the sky and closing my eyes and taking in deep breaths of air. The next thing I knew, a car had pulled over facing me on the shoulder, and a female voice was calling me over to the passenger side of the car. And as I got closer to the car, I could hear her asking me what I was doing. I didn't recognize or know her. And as I got to the car, she repeated the questions and asked me if I was okay. I still don't remember if I answered her or if I was talking at all. I remember getting into the back seat of the car and the car turning around and heading in the direction of the turnoff. I remember hearing the car engine and the noise the wind made coming in the window and the smell of a cigarette and hearing talking, but not what was being said. I remember being dropped off at the end of our driveway and getting out of the car and closing the door, but not the trip there. Everything seemed so surreal. I walked down the driveway and could feel the gravel under my feet, but at the same time, I felt like I was floating above the ground. I went inside the house and went to the bathroom to shower. I remember looking at myself in the mirror and touching my hands and cheeks, but not feeling them. I began to take off my clothing to shower. It was at this point that I realized my pants were wet with urine, and I was missing one of my runners. I went to my room, climbed in my bed, and fell asleep. When I woke in the morning feeling as solid as a rock, I could hardly move. Everything hurt from my head to toes. I went about my day normally without saying a word to anyone, but what had happened? Because to tell the truth, I didn't really know. It stayed that way for over 35 years. My mother passed away suddenly one week before my 16th birthday in early June of '77, 3 weeks after my encounter. And to this day, I do not have any memory of her passing or the events surrounding that time. It seemed like a year longer had been erased from my life. Wow, that's pretty crazy, isn't it? I've had plenty of time to think about much of this and have tried hard to reason within myself as to why I can remember the encounter but not my mother's death. Was there a possible connection between what I'd seen that night 3 weeks before she passed? I know how she passed and why, but I cannot remember anything leading up to it or after it. Not even with my therapist's help. My therapist and others have hypothesized the possibility that my encounter was meant to be. It saved me from a harsh memory, but did it? I remember being beside her, holding her hand while kissing her forehead, saying I love you or saying goodbye. Gone forever but not forgotten. Thank you for giving me a safe place to share my encounter and speak my views freely. I look forward to your thoughts and replies. Sincerely yours, Jill. Wow, that's a pretty upsetting and sad story, Jill. Sad. I'm sorry that you had to, that all ended that way. It's not really fair, is it? I never got to see my mom either when she died. It's a different scenario, though. I don't know what's going on. I mean, I got an idea, but I can't deliver my idea smoothly on here quite just yet. But there is definitely 100% something is going on with our energy, where we are, the energy around us, the way we vibrate, whatever you want to call it. Far, far too many people report not hearing anything. Everything's dead silent, can't even hear the creak. No bugs, no nothing when these experiences are going down. So how do you guys all explain that? Right? How do you guys explain that one? But that was a pretty in-depth, detailed share of how you were feeling and what you heard, saw, and felt. It's pretty detailed. I'll guarantee you probably just explained it far better than a lot of people could for themselves, and they're probably shaking their head. Hit the nail on the head. That's what I experienced, right? That's also where a man named Robert and his wife and kids were managing a provincial campground somewhere around the exact same area, and they had a whole pile of experiences there. And that dirtbag organization went over there and violated the shit out of him and that area, took advantage of him, discredited him. Anyway, something else. I'm sorry if it took a while to get to that, Jill. I can't explain it smoothly yet. I will be able to one day, but not today. I cannot smoothly explain what's going on when everybody loses themselves. It's very confusing. It's something we have not been taught anything about. Right? Nothing. Now, here we go with another one. Anybody wants to add to this, comment section below, all right? Or email me at sharemystory@howtohunt.com, okay? If you want to add to this, you've been in the same area, had the same thing happen, whatever. Anything. This is my two sons' story. I grew up on a farm in northeastern Washington in the 50s and 60s with a father who was very open-minded about the reality of UFOs and Sasquatch. My family saw our first UFO in the 60s. It hovered above our pasture at dusk, seeming to light up the rocky expanse of Whitestone Mountain rising above our pasture. My father, being a state patrolman, advised his office of the incident and followed it, moved slowly up our valley until it took off. UFOs and Bigfoot were often a topic of conversation, always leaving room for them to be part of our reality. My boys grew up fishing on the Cowlitz River and had an incident over 10 years ago when they were in their late teens. The Cowlitz has a salmon hatchery on about 4 miles down, and about 4 miles downstream is a trout hatchery. The paved road between the hatcheries rises in elevation, and it has some pretty extreme cliffs on the riverside of the road. My two boys and a girlfriend were driving between the hatcheries late at night. Sorry, dog hairs everywhere around here. Between the hatcheries late at night when a deer jumped onto the road, running across it toward the truck. The deer stopped in front of the truck and looked back in the direction from which it had come. The headlights illuminated a figure towering above a large Scotch broom, which was what they understood to be a Sasquatch, staring back at the deer and them. They estimated it to be about 8 feet tall, and its eyes glowed red. My son told me that it must have been a male because of the red eyes. Buck's eyes glow red and does are a different color. The deer continued running and went off the steep cliff toward the river. The kids were so shocked by what they saw, and they took off and confirmed with each other that they had all seen the same thing. All I have seen and heard on Bigfoot leads me to believe that they are indeed a part of our world. They seem to be more defensive than offensive, and for some unknown reason, our government has determined to avoid the subject, just like UFOs. Thanks for listening, Sandra. Thanks for sharing that, Sandra. Excuse me, thanks for sharing that one. I wonder if your kids are still watching this channel. I'm imagining they probably are, right? And the fish hatchery connection. It's either the hatchery itself where they're pinching fish, or it just has something to do with rivers. But almost all the local fish hatcheries here in British Columbia that I'm familiar with all have elevated sightings during the fall. Especially that one near Harrison. And there's another one. All right, here we go. Next. Appreciate you sending that in. Big time. That night at about 10 p.m., we called it a night. We went to our tent. We took our rifles with us. There's no title in this email, by the way. My rifle was a custom Marlin lever action in 45-70. My brother-in-law had a Marlin in 30-30. We went into our bags and were soon asleep. At about 3 a.m., we were jerked awake by a loud crack from just inside the bush. My brother-in-law whispered, "Did you hear that?" And I whispered, "Listen." We both listened as something very large started walking towards us from the bush about 40 yards away. My brother-in-law and I both slid out of our bags and gripped our rifles. Excuse me. We listened as the footfalls came nearer. It was a no-moon cloudy night, so it was pitch black. We knew we were the only humans around, and this was no animal. I'm not a fearful man, but I can tell you that even being armed with a very powerful rifle, I was experiencing real fear as this thing started walking towards our tent, and the strides and footfalls told me this is no human. It is huge. It walked right up to our tent and stopped. I started to reach for the door, for the tent door zipper, but a voice in my head said, "Stay put." So there we sat for at least 5 minutes as this thing walked around the tent. My mind is trying to process the size of this thing by its 6-foot strides and footfalls. It was telling me at least 9 feet tall and 800 to 1,000 pounds. Hell, my mind was screaming at me. This thing can easily stomp you to death or just fall on you and kill you. I also thought it can just roll you up in the tent and throw you down the hill into the lake to drown. It stood silent for about the last minute. That minute seemed like to last for like an hour. Finally, it turned and just walked back into the bush until we could not hear it anymore. Even though this is not an actual sighting, I can tell you that the experience has remained vivid for the rest of my life, and I know what it was, and that it could have killed us at any moment. Thanks, Steve, for taking the time to read this encounter. To any naysayers out there, I have one question. Why are you here? My personal belief is that this tribe has been around for thousands of years, and they're smarter than us, and their stealth and strength are beyond our comprehension. Steve, to you and yours, Merry Christmas. Brent Smock, Greenwood, Indiana. And there's three photos included. And there you go. Well, I'm guessing that's you in the pictures. Anyway, I appreciate you sending that in, man. And let me save these photos. I don't know why. What's up with walking to the tents? What are they looking for? What are they looking for? They already know you're there. They probably watch you set it up. They already know who you look like, how many of you there are, what your intentions are. Why walk up to the tent in the night? Why? Why? Here's another one. How long is this? Well, this is a fair distance. All right, going in. Here we go. There's no subject title on this email. Steve, I came across your YouTube channel not too long ago and found your Sasquatch videos. I know it sounds corny, but it's refreshing that someone with your experience and credentials, if you will, has taken such a bold stand on the subject, especially against the blah, blah, blah organization. They do more harm than they do good, and I could waste a lot of your time talking on the matter. But I'd like to share some of my experiences that I had during my teenage years with these things. I've told very few people outside my family about this, and the ones that I have think I'm being stupid with them, or that I simply don't know what I was looking at because I was so young. It usually ends with some joke about being raped by a Sasquatch, and everybody thinks I'm joking. But it's the God-honest truth. I'll start off with a little background info about myself. I'm 41 years old, married with children, a veteran of the U.S. Navy Seabees, and a licensed electrician in the great state of Iowa. Although I currently reside in Iowa, I grew up in southern Pennsylvania, and this is where I had the majority of my encounters, with the exception of one. I'm old enough that I grew up without cell phones, computers, and the internet. Bigfoot at the time was only something I had heard of before on TV in a joking manner, and by all rights I thought it was a myth just like anyone else. So anyway, I'll get to it. When I was about 13 years old, I lived in a very small town in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains called Ortana. I really got into shooting a bow and started spending every ounce of time every day in the woods trying to learn the mountain and learn the animal movements. The next summer, about half a mile from the house, I came across a section of the woods that was crawling with trails, and every time I went back there, I always spooked deer or would see signs activity. Closer to reason, I started scouting the area for possible tree stand locations and brought my best friend Paul with me to find the right spots to set them up. After walking around a bit, we found a power line trail about 100 yards away from our stands that cut up and down the side of the mountain. We realized that if we walked west a quarter mile. It would bring us to a road that would take us back into town, and it would be quieter getting into the spot. A few weeks later, when the season opened, we went back there early afternoon and got in our stands. We were overly optimistic about shooting a deer that night, but it turned out to be completely dead that evening. Not just no deer, but no squirrel, no birds, just silence. And as the sun started setting over the mountain, I started to hear leaves rustling a ways away, but it didn't last long, and figured the squirrels must be returning. Paul and I agreed to meet at a point on the Powerline Trail about 15 minutes after the sun went down over the ridge. I got to the spot first, then took a knee at the edge of the wood line and waited. After about 5 minutes, I heard rustling back in the woods not too far from where I would have been hunting. Eventually, Paul came up from the west of the Powerline Trail, and I stepped out of the woods and met him. I remember that no sooner did I ask him if he saw anything, that we heard leaves and twigs snap up the Powerline Trail in the woods not too far away. Instantly, we thought deer. We knocked an arrow and knelt down beside the wood line, staring up the trail, thinking the deer would come out about 20 yards from our position. And not even seconds later, the branches of a sizable tree about 6 to 7 feet up were pushed out of the way by this incredibly massive and long arm. Out of the woods steps a 8, maybe 9 foot tall bipedal creature covered in thick gray hair / fur that looked to have streaked of black and tan like a deer's hide. It was absolutely massive, with no more than 15 yards away when it exited the woods. It pushed the trees out of the way and at a 45-degree angle walked away from us up the mountain across the Powerline Trail and disappeared into the woods on the other side. You could hear it take slow, deep breaths as it walked away. The encounter was no more than 10 seconds, but there's absolutely, positively no way this could be misidentified for a bear or anything else. The only other thing remotely close would be a human, but the sheer size and muscle definition completely rules that out, and I repeat, completely. This thing was covered in hair, yet I specifically could see the muscle definition in its biceps and its legs as it walked by. Its chest was 3 to 4 feet thick. Holy shit. And had a very thick to no neck at all. I only saw a side glimpse of its face, and what appeared to be a cheek was also tan in color like a deer. When it walked very similar to what was on the very controversial Patterson film. I can't even begin to tell you what goes through your mind as a kid staring at one of these. I was absolutely terrified. Yet I was completely stunned with amazement at what I was seeing. It's completely indescribable. You're terrified at one point, yet completely frozen in amazement. You want to run, yet you're afraid to move. We had bows with broadheads knocked up, and not even once did I think about shooting at this thing. As soon as it disappeared, we looked at each other, terrified, and ran the whole way out to the road. I don't believe for 1 minute that thing didn't know we were there all evening, and I'm not quite sure that it didn't know we were kneeling with our bows. When it walked, it wasn't in a hurry. It was non-threatening and acted like we weren't even there. I know I was just 14 at the time, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't a human or anything else, and it was a Sasquatch, and they are real, 100%. Second sighting. When I was 16, my parents took the family on a vacation to upstate New York on a fishing and camping trip. Somehow my parents knew the owners of a campground that was located up in the mountains in a pretty secluded location. They had recently retired, and though they kept the place up really well, there was no one else there except us. There was a small lake that was filled with pike and bass that laid right up to the steep mountainside, covered in thick timber the whole way up. Once we got settled in and the tents up, we sat around the fire talking till after dark sometime. My mom was the first one to notice a bad smell that she would periodically pick up and wondered if there was a dead animal close by. It took some time, but eventually we all smelled it. And though I understand where she was coming from, I thought it was like a strong musky scent with death and trash can. What happened next was unexplainable. As if someone went over to a wall and flipped a switch, the whole woods went completely silent. Literally not a sound. Even the night sounds of the lake 100 yards away went dead. All the frogs and crickets and other insects within our hearing distance went dead. We all stared at each other, waiting to see what my dad was going to do. And I remember starting to get slightly scared when my dad went to his tent to get his .44 that he carried. But no sooner did he go to the tent, yet again someone flipped the switch, and everything, one by one, started up again, till all the sounds returned and the smell left. At this point, we were all unnerved and ready for bed. My dad, being the guy he is, had another gun with him, because he never go out to the woods without a gun, or two maybe, right? He gave me a .357 Magnum to sleep in my tent my brothers and I were staying in. Keep in mind, none of us knew anything about the smell and silent woods phenomenon that we have associated with reported sightings. My dad at the time was convinced it was a bear that had come close to camp, and though my brothers and I slept through the night, my dad told us the next morning that he did hear something in the middle of the night come very close to camp. 2 days later, I was fishing on the lake in a little 16-foot flat bottom with a trolling motor they provided for us. I was fishing about 30 or 40 feet off the shoreline, where the mountainside shot up at about a 60-degree angle, covered in pines. I was throwing a buzz bait and a spinner bait up to the shoreline and working it back to the boat. I heard a small splash to my left side and turned that direction and cast forward the center ripple. Out of my right peripheral vision, I saw a large object come from shore and splash in the water about 3 or 4 feet out. Thinking a rock slide, I simply trolled down another 30 feet and continued fishing. And just as I cast out again, a massive rock comes flying out of the woods and lands within 5 feet in front of the boat. Almost right behind it came another one, and this one I saw. It came from about 30 feet up the steep wood line and shot up and out and landed about 3 feet to the right of my boat. These rocks were the size of a football or basketball, and it was obvious they were being thrown and not a rock slide. Seconds after the last rock was thrown, this deep and loud grunt came out of the mountainside, and 2 trees, big pines about 30 feet tall, started shaking rapidly back and forth. It continued to shoot up the side of the mountain at a speed that seems completely unnatural. As it moved up the side of the mountain, it moved everything in its way. I could hear big limbs crack and full-grown trees being pushed around. There's a small clearing, about what I would have guessed 100 yards up the mountainside, where a boulder rock formation was, and it came into sight. I knew exactly what it was. It was at a considerable distance, but it was clear that it was upright on 2 legs and was humanoid. I couldn't tell what its height or other features were, except it looked brownish in color. It took one giant leap up the rock formation that was taller than the creature and disappeared into the woods again. I turned the little trolling motor to full blast and headed back to camp. I tried to tell my folks about it, and though I don't think they thought I was lying at the time, they didn't necessarily know what to think of it, especially when a little over a year before, I freaked out telling them I saw a Sasquatch in the woods not far from home. And now I see another one in New York. I can't stress enough how fast this thing moved uphill. You would think the fact that I had saw one of these a second time would be the amazing thing, but it's how fast it moved. And I stress uphill. That still blows me away to this day. I'm more than confident that I would be dead yet again if it really wanted me dead. But it had pinned me down helpless on the water, and if any of these rocks would have hit me, I would have been dead instantly. These were the times I actually saw Bigfoot. However, I have at least a half dozen more stories about encounters with these things spread about a 4-year period while living in the southern Pennsylvania area. Some of them, when they happened, I was so young and uninformed on the subject that it wasn't until the internet and such that other stories lined up with what I saw and experienced. I can't explain how some people go looking for these things their whole life and never have an encounter, let alone see one. And others like myself had multiple encounters without ever looking. Thanks for taking the time to read my story. And thank you for using your voice and platform to get to the bottom of this. There is definitely more going on that we're not being told about these beings/creatures. You're more than welcome to share this if you so please. Sincerely, Aaron Reed. There we go. Name's familiar. I wonder if you sent me some more, Aaron. You probably did. If you haven't, do it. Let's see what you've come up with since then, if anything. I don't know if too many people out there are coming up with much more than what we share here. Well, yeah, actually, I guess we do have some people, don't we? That is kind of weird, isn't it? How so many people can have, excuse me, so many experiences and some not. I guess I'm one of them, aren't I? Now, what am I doing? Lots. I'm behind, but I'm getting caught up. It's February, going on March. I'm going to have to get hold of some people and make some plans here pretty quick, aren't I? Take that next step of possibly experiencing something, or possibly not. We'll let my gut decide that one. Like I said, I need to go meet people, look them in the eye, listen to their stories, their experiences, look them dead in the eye, square up with them, and then my gut will know exactly what to or not to do. I trust my gut 150%. 150%. My gut rules absolutely every breath I take in this lifetime. And I hope you guys learn to do that yourselves too. It's very handy. It's a very, very handy thing. But it also causes a lot of frustration with what's going on in the world. A lot of frustration. Anyway, Adventure Dogs is patiently sitting there. It's kind of funny having a dog, isn't it? Like I've been involved with a lot of dogs in life, friends, in camp and stuff, but I've never actually had my own dog. It's so weird to see the connection, right? I mean, this dog, you know, she gets up, she's friendly with everybody. But when I wake up, she sticks to me like glue. I get up, go in the living room, sit down. She's got to go right at my feet. I get up and go to the kitchen. She's got to go with me. I go to the bathroom. She's got to go with me. It's so bizarre. I feel bad for her when I leave. So when I leave, she loses her shit. Kind of weird, isn't it? Kind of weird. It's a very different experience for me. I've never had that, and I've been basically by myself most of my life and very independent, right? So it's a new experience to see something with such a frickin' glued connection to you. I'm so happy to see you. You know, I had to go away for 3 days and come home, and she's peeing. She's peeing all over the place still. When she gets let out of the house, to come and run up to me. Anyway, oh man, the river's gonna be screwed again. Maybe, possibly, I hope not. I really want to go see if I can get some good steelhead videos made and some more nature recorded, shared with all of you. We'll see how it goes, but the forecast isn't too good. I'm rambling and babbling. I got coffee. I got to get going. Share my story at howtohunt.com. All right? Just do it. Just get it shared. My stomach growling. Man, I got something. That's something I thought was fairly important. I need to speak on, but I guess it'll probably come to me later as usual, and I'll do it later on. Anyway, there you go. There you go. I'm back home, getting stuff done. I'll be back tomorrow. Can't stop me.